Hello, good afternoon. Today our guest is Walter Block, and we will be continuing with part two of our discussion. So, Walter, the last time we had a fascinating discussion that was interrupted because of technology. So, we're going to continue by talking about space colonization. Why would someone be interested in the economic opportunities afforded by space, and what are these economic opportunities?
Um, well, that's a good question. My understanding, they say that the moon is made of green cheese. Well, that's silly. Obviously, the moon is not made of green cheese, but there are minerals and resources in the moon, and there are minerals and resources on Mars. And it's possible that one day we can have an atmosphere in Mars, and also there are asteroids that are solid, I don't know, copper or gold or platinum or who knows what. So there are a lot of resources out there. And also there's some technology that can be done better in low gravity area, or in a vacuum where we have space is pretty much of a vacuum. So there are lots of economic opportunities out there: the moon, the Mars, asteroids, and uh, so and also the specialization and division of labor. The fact that if there were people on the moon and the Mars, they could do things that we can't do, or they could do things a lot more cheaply than we can do, and we could have trade with them, and we would all be richer. So I think I won't say that the opportunities are endless, but they're vast.
I agree. And who knows, Walter, maybe the moon can provide us with alternative sources of energy.
Absolutely, yes, because they don't have an atmosphere. The sun impacts them much more heavily. We do have this on Earth, an attempt, green energy and solar energy, and we might be able to pick up more solar energy on the moon than on the Earth because of our atmosphere. I'm not really an expert in this sort of a thing. I'm more of an economist, and I'm having enough trouble being an economist, let alone being a mining engineer. But I think just from a layman's point of view, and I'm a layman in this regard, the economic opportunities of space travel are great, and there's also tourism. A lot of people would give a lot of money to go have a little vacation on the moon or on Mars, or something like that, or just be on a spaceship. So I think that it's uncontroversial to say that there are many economic opportunities out there in space.
All right, Walter, but you wrote a book about space. Walter, how can we establish property rights in space? To some, this sounds very strange and maybe even just downright weird.
Yes, I think that you're right. Unfortunately, I think you're right that a lot of people will think it's downright weird, because what they have in mind for Mars and the moon and other heavenly bodies, asteroids, is something akin to the United Nations Law of the Sea Treaty, where the oceans are the common heritage of all mankind, and there's no private property in the oceans. And they want to apply this to Mars and the moon and asteroids, and they want to say, well, individual private people should not be allowed to own parts of Mars or the moon, because this is just unconscionable, and we can't allow that. And to my way of thinking, there are only three ways to deal with resources. One is private property, the other is government owns it, and the third is unowned. And then you have the tragedy of the commons. If we don't own it, we don't take care of it. It's to no one's incentive to take care of things. So I would go back to John Locke, famous philosopher, and also Murray Rothbard, who's done yeoman work on this area, and say that the people who should own bits of Mars and bits of the moon are the people who homesteaded. Now, unfortunately, the first few people on the moon were government employees, And so who should own the parts of the moon where they interacted and where they mixed their labor with? I would say them as individuals. Other people would say, well, they work for the government, so the government should own it. But that's just a small little part. Nowadays, you've got various private people who want to go and have private space exploration. And when they get to the moon or Mars and they land there, I think they should be the owners of it, and we should apply private property. They say that what is it in the Soviet Union? I think 97% of the land was collectivized farming and 3% were private. And on the 3% private ownership of farmland in the Soviet Union, they produced 25% of the crops. And on the 97% of the land that was collectivized by the government, they produced only 75% of the crops. So you have this wild disparity between private ownership and government ownership. So I think, economics applies on Earth, on the moon, on Mars, on Saturn. Economics applies everywhere. And if we apply economics to the heavenly bodies, we have a very strong case for privatization.
And as a libertarian, Walter, I agree with you, but let's be realistic. The state will have an interest in dominating space exploration. So, how do states decide to allocate rights among themselves? Because eventually that will be the case.
Well, you're quite right. And, I have this motto that land is just slow moving water and water is fast moving land, because there is water that is slow moving ice, and there is land that's fast moving, namely volcano ash and mudslides. So I see a strong analogy between the land and the water. And I'm always looking for analogies. And now you're quite right. Space is a new frontier. So let's look at your question from from the Earth perspective. And we are now having problems with the South China Sea. China has created a whole bunch of little islands based on submerged rocks. And now they're claiming, 12-mile radius of all these little islands. And they're pretty much claiming that the South China Sea should be a Chinese lake, and they don't want anyone else floating around there. Well, so we are having problems on Earth between nations as to who should have the right to sail sail in South China Sea, and we'll probably have the same difficulty on the moon. I mean, suppose the U.S. says, "Look, we were there first, and therefore we own the whole moon, and you Chinese people, you stay off. It's our moon." Well, we're going to have some problems then, similar to the problems that we're having with the South China Sea. And I would say that if the United States did that, and I hope they don't do that, that would be highly problematic, because you can't own the whole moon just because you perched on an acre or two of it. And if the Chinese get there, or the Indians, or the Israelis, or Brazilians, or whoever else gets to the moon, I mean, the moon's a big place. There should be room for everyone to have a couple of square miles, or a couple of hundreds of square miles. And hopefully there wouldn't be any fighting between them over that. And hopefully there'll be no fighting, military fighting in the South China Sea, because the U.S. is bringing warships there, and the Chinese don't much like that. And soon the Chinese warships are going to be floating off the coast of Florida and Virginia and New York, and the Americans aren't going to like that. But I mean, especially in a nuclear age, the idea of China and the U.S. fighting each other would be horrible. And I wouldn't want them to fight over oceans on the Earth, and I wouldn't want them to fight over a land on Mars or the moon. I think that if we follow the John Lockean notion and the Rothbardian notion that you only own what you mix your labor with, and as I say, the moon is a very vast place compared to how many people are now on the moon, namely none. So hopefully we can do this in a peaceable manner.
But Walter, I agree with you, though I do believe that space exploration will shed light on the political economy of space capitalism. So, for example, more than likely, when the state gets involved, the state will offer benefits to rent seekers and political lobbyists. This is just a reality.
Yes, you know the problem with you, Lipton, is you're too you're too mired in reality. I don't mean this as a criticism. I think you're quite right. You have a realpolitik point of view, and I'm sort of floating off in the air like a Luftmenschen in Yiddish. That means a person of the air who's floating around who has no connection to reality or to the earth. Whereas you are the opposite. You're my good angel saying, well, you know, let's get realistic here. And you're quite right. Governments will do that. Well, we predict that they'll do that based on what they've always done. And I think that's a very good prediction on your part. I think the reality is, as you say, that the government will be involved, whether we like it or not. But I'm more of a theoretician here. I'm talking about what should be from a libertarian point of view. But I acknowledge you're absolutely correct that when you bring me back down to earth or back down to reality and say, well, the reality is that this will not happen, and the government will blunder onto the moon and blunder onto Mars, just as they blundered onto everywhere else where they blundering, and you know, call it the Antarctica and the Arctic and the oceans and the rivers and the lakes.
And then we'll also contend with ethical actors who will purport that it is unethical to appropriate space resources because God created the environment. But I see a can of worms. However, at the end of the day, libertarian philosophy will prove to be correct. In the absence of state ownership, industries will be more competitive.
Oh yes, I agree with you. I mean, you know, we have what is it in economics? It's the normative and the positive.
Yes.
The normative is what should be, the positive is what is, and what causes what. And we have to keep in mind both aspects of this, both sides of the same economic coin. In other words, there's the economic coin, it's got two sides, and one side is normative and one side is positive. And I'm maybe more stressing the normative and you more the positive, but we both agree that both are important. And I think you're quite right when you say that if and to the degree that we have private property, we will have more prosperity, and not only more prosperity, but more connection with ethics. Whereas critics would say, oh, no, 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 private enterprise is evil. They're trying to make profits, and profits are no good, and we need government, and we have to have public goods. So this, you know, Hayek once said that each generation of libertarians is consigned to fight the same old battles. And we've been fighting these battles since, I don't know, since recorded history, between those that want to have an aggrandized state and those that want to have decentralized private property. And we fought them in the 17th century, 18th century, 19th, 20th, 21st century now. And in the 22nd century, which one of these days will come, we'll be fighting the same battles on the moon and Mars. And who knows? I think one of the moons of Neptune or Jupiter is supposed to be habitable. I'm not sure about that. So we might be fighting those battles on Neptune and Jupiter, or at least maybe not Neptune and Jupiter, but on some of the moons of those planets. Yes, so we are consigned to fight the same battles. You know, should we have free enterprise? To what degree should we have free enterprise? Is the government needed? Well, if so, how big should the government be? And from the libertarian point of view, the less government, the better. And from the anarcho-capitalist point of view, the least government is no government at all.
And Walter, people often forget that throughout history, when businesses do not accept subsidies, they tend to be more productive.
Yeah,
This is usually
absolutely.
not said, but I've read many books and studies making this point.
Well,
Subsidies are bad for the entrepreneur and bad for the economy.
yes, there is even an aphorism on this, and it says, "He who pays the piper calls the tune. He who pays the musician tells the musicians what to play." Well, if the government is giving subsidies to private enterprise, well, to that extent, you don't really have laissez-faire capitalism. You have crony capitalism, where you have government supposedly allowing private enterprise, but really pulling the strings and calling the shots and calling the tune. You know, we have two well, we really have three main systems of political economy. One is a laissez-faire capitalism, where you have private enterprise. But then there are two other sides to this three-sided coin, if I can use that phrase. One of them is socialism. And under socialism, a government owns all the means of production, the mines and the factories and industry and the stores and all sorts of stuff like that. But then you have economic fascism. By the way, Bernie Sanders is not really a socialist. He doesn't favor government ownership of pretty much everything. He's more of an economic fascist, where he favors government control. Now, look, under Hitler and Mussolini, you had private companies in Germany. There was BMW and Stuka and Volkswagen, and they were private companies, but the government called the tune. So when as you say, when government subsidizes and government highly regulates, and that's really where Bernie Sanders is more of an economic fascist than a socialist, when there's heavy regulation, well, then government is calling the tune, and you don't really have free enterprise capitalism, you have crony capitalism. And you're quite right when you say, well, then you'll have less efficiency because government why is it that government is so inefficient? Well, because, when they fail, and all human beings fail, they don't automatically go broke. Whereas in the private sector, if you don't make a good shoe or a good pen, you don't make as much money as your competitors, and you start losing profits, and you have to exit the industry. And the people who are left are more efficient than you. So that's one of the main reasons why private enterprise is more efficient. And it's more efficient to the extent that there's no government subsidies, as you quite rightly say, because when the government subsidizes, then the government controls.
Yeah, and Walter, too often libertarians do not explain what we mean by the misallocation of resources. So, for example, most government policies are driven by sentiment and emotionalism, i.e., renewable energy. If the government assumes that renewables will be profitable, then productive entrepreneurs may divert from their original activities to produce renewables. And usually, renewables are not as profitable as we expect them to be. Therefore, subsidies misallocate resources. But we have not been able to simplify the matter to ordinary people as libertarians.
Yes, again, you're quite right. I hate to keep agreeing with you. And if you say something I disagree with, I will certainly pipe up. But everything you've said is correct so far. We libertarians have not done as good a job as we could have done in explaining to the average person why it's not good to have a misallocation of resources. Look, right now, the allocation between peas and carrots, I think, is optimal, or at least I've heard nobody complain. Even Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi are not saying that the market has misallocated resources between peas and carrots. And let's suppose that, I don't know, 0.5% of the GDP should go to peas and 0.5% should go to carrots. And now all of a sudden, government starts subsidizing carrots. Well, now we're going to have triple the number of carrots compared to the amount of peas. And people are going to say, well, that's great because we have more carrots. Well, no, it's not so great, because if we have more carrots, it's at the expense of something else, possibly peas. And the allocation of peas and carrots was fine beforehand. And now government gets into the mix and misallocates resources. And we think that we're better off because we have more carrots, but it's at the cost of something. Something's got to give. So we have fewer peas. Well, peas and carrots are just a made up example, but the government does this in all sorts of ways. I mean, the green energy thing is pushing us toward what is it? Solar power and water power and renewable power, and away from oil and also nuclear power. They're away from that, and certainly away from coal. Well, maybe the optimal allocation was before government started putting its thumb on the putting its thumb all over the economy and pushing us in one direction rather than the other direction. So I think you're quite right when you say that whenever government subsidizes anything, it does it at the cost of something else, and it seems that it's okay, but it's not really okay because whenever government subsidizes something, it has to deprecate something else, and the market has spoken and wants these other things. Now you might say, well, we don't want coal because coal is or oil is, and by the way, the price of gasoline now is going through the roof. It used to be in New Orleans, I'd get gas for, I don't know, $1.75. Now it's like $3, and in California it's $4. Well, why is this? Because they are penalizing oil. They're not allowing pipelines to go through. Now you might say, well, oil and coal is what do you call it? Pollution. It creates pollution. Well, the Rothbardian view would be, well, if there's pollution, well, then you sue the polluters because it's a trespass. But apart from that, I emphasize the point you made that we need a proper allocation of resources, and peas and carrots are just a silly example, but I think it indicates more important things, like say with energy.
Of course, Walter. So, for example, value in an economy is subjective. If we have 100 carrots, but people only demand 10, that's a waste.
That's right. You might think, well, 100 carrots is great, but no, it's at the cost of something else. If it weren't at the cost of something else, extra carrots are great. We can always use some more carrots.
Mm.
But another economic insight is opportunity costs or alternative costs. Whenever you do anything, you do it at the cost of not being able to do something else as well, or at all. Like right now, you and I are talking, and we could have been, I don't know what, sleeping, eating, riding a bicycle, swimming, who knows what. So we are doing our conversation at the cost of other things that we could have been doing had we not been talking. Now, we both decided that it would be worthwhile to do this, but we have to realize the economics of cost, namely, whenever you do something, you do it at the cost of not being able to do something else at all or as well. So if we have 10 times the amount of carrots as the market would come up with, well, it's at the cost of something. And it might be at the cost of peas, it might be at the cost of string beans, it might be at the cost of shoes, who knows? But we have good and sufficient reason to think that the market will allocate resources in the proper way. Because look, suppose that we wanted half peas and half carrots, and right now we had 10 times the amount of carrots and not enough peas. Well, that means that there'd be more profits in making peas. That means that farmers would be led by Adam Smith's invisible hand, stop making carrots because we have so many of them and there's not that much profit in them, and to start making peas because people want more peas. So we would naturally shift from carrots to peas until a balance was reached. Well, now look, we're never at equilibrium. We're never going to have a full equilibrium of everything, but there's always a tendency to have the right allocation of peas and carrots. And if government starts subsidizing the one, well, they're misallocating resources and then making us all poorer than we would otherwise be.
Exactly my point, Walter. Even in this conversation, there are inherent costs. So, for example, we're having an economic discussion. We could have opted to discuss economics, but in a more polemical sense.
Right. Yes. I'm delighted to be discussing.
Exactly. So there are always costs. But Walter, I'm going to speak for a brief moment on East Asia. So, Walter?
Yes. Good.
Yes. Some may argue that the East Asian developmental model has disproved free market economics, but they are wrong. And let me give you a perfect example. Industrial policy was more successful in East Asia because it was driven by the market. When it became inefficient to subsidize a failing agency, the subsidy was removed. In other words, East Asian dictators were not very sentimental.
Well, I think that there when you speak of East Asia, you're thinking of either China or the Five Tigers.
Yeah, the tigers, more the tigers.
Okay, well, the five tigers, I forget which ones, Japan, Korea,
Singapore, yeah,
Singapore,
Singapore, Taiwan, Hong
right,
Kong.
right. Those are the five tigers. And in the 1950s, they were all very, very poor. Japan was very poor, just lost the war. And what they did is pretty much adopt free enterprise policies. And now their GDP is better than many countries in Western Europe, approaching Canada and the United States. So, and maybe an even better example, empirical example than the five tigers is East Germany and West Germany and North and South Korea. Because in East Germany and West Germany, it was the same people, the same culture, the same history, the same language, the same everything. And because of an act of war, they were cut into East and West Germany. And the same thing with North and South Korea. The same culture, the same language, the same people, the same history, the same anything you name it, it was the same. And then, due to an act of war, the country was cut in half, North and South Korea. Well, North Korea and East Germany followed one pattern of economic development, and West Germany and South Korea followed a very different pattern of economic development. And guess what? Well, we have almost a laboratory experiment here. So you're quite right in talking about the five tigers, and I think East Germany and West Germany and North and South Korea are another good example to have almost laboratory experiments where something akin to free enterprise capitalism was followed in West Germany and South Korea. And something akin to socialism, fascism was followed in East Germany and North Korea. And now, one way to tell the difference is go up at night on a plane and look at, are there any lights? And there are no lights in North Korea, and there are plenty of lights in South Korea. Another way to tell the difference is by statistics. Well, people lie about statistics. What's that joke? There are statistics, damn no.
Lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Right, right. Yeah, thank you. I need all the help I can get here. But a much better way to tell what's really happening in economic development is people voting with their feet. Now,
Exactly. Milton Friedman. Remember what Milton Friedman told people? People are going to Hong Kong, not China.
right, right. People are going to West Germany, not East Germany. Nobody was trying to get out of West Germany and go to East Germany. People were trying to get out of East Germany and go to West Germany, and the East German military was shooting them. And the same with North and South Korea. Nobody's in the South is trying to get into the North. The North people are trying to get to the South. So, when you talk about voting with your feet, you think of going into a ballot box, and instead of pulling a lever with your hand, you pull a lever with your foot. No, no, no. We're talking about migration patterns. And Milton Friedman was absolutely right in saying that that's a very, very good way of determining what's really going on here, whereas the government statistics don't really tell you what's happening in terms of economic development.
And Walter, free markets do not induce spiritual poverty. People are happier in countries promoting economic freedom. So
I think you're right. And there
yes,
are sociologists and psychologists who have done studies on this. Now, that's not my area of expertise, but I think you're absolutely right. Although there are some people, like, say, Bernie Sanders, where would he be happier? Well, the fact of the matter is he's in the United States. He could have moved to the socialist paradise of North Korea or the Soviet Union or Cuba, but he didn't decide to do that. So we can deduce that he's happier here, or at least in terms of the way he sees his options. But probably there are some people who are really advocates of socialism who might be happier in Cuba. But I think you're right that on average, the average person is much more happy, productive, wealthy in
free
a
market economies
market economy. Yes.
because they promote individualism. Individualism is not selfishness. Individualism means that we're able to express how we feel and make appropriate choices. In socialism, individualism is deprecated. We're basically slaves. So why would we be happy? We don't have an incentive to be happy under a socialist regime.
Well, it's interesting because there are really two definitions of socialism. One is the bad socialism, and that would be coercive socialism, where government runs everything. But there is such a thing called voluntary socialism. What's that expression? from each according to his ability, to each according to his need is a socialist
The
motto.
family.
Well, the family and the kibbutz and the I don't know, the cooperative. Take the Israeli kibbutzim, the kibbutzes in Israel. They lived according to the maxim, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. And some people were happy doing that. And from a libertarian point of view, we I would say are almost indifferent between that type of society, as long as it's voluntary. So the real essence, you see, one of the benefits of free enterprise is that we can encompass that kind of socialism in our worldview, whereas the socialists of the Bernie Sanders variety can't contemplate little bits of capitalism. We can encompass little bits of socialism, or a lot bits, depending upon how many people want to do that. If a lot of people want to live in kibbutz, God bless them. That's part of free enterprise. Um, and you're quite right. In the family, the little girl eats not in accordance with her ability to earn income, but in accordance with her need, as determined by her parents. So this gives a different dimension of socialism. So we do have two varieties of socialism: the bad coercive socialism, where the government will not allow you to own any means of production, and the good socialism, where you can have a collectivized society like the kibbutz. Or look, I teach at Holy Cross. Not Holy. I used to teach at Holy Cross. I now teach at Loyola University, both Jesuit schools. And the Jesuits have a sort of a policy of sharing. They're a wealthy order, but each individual really owns nothing. It's the order that owns everything. And they follow this voluntary socialist policy, and it's a perfectly reasonable and eminently compatible with free enterprise system.
Of course, you're correct, Walter, but as a student of Murray Rothbard, I'm sure you remember that even in a socialist society, a natural leader will emerge.
Well, that's
So
true.
there will be competition.
Well, that's true. That's certainly true. That the kibbutz needs a president, and the Jesuit order needs a leader, the leader of the Jesuits, and the Catholic Church needs a pope. So yes, there's competition even under socialism. There's always competition. But the competition, I think, the key for I mean, there are two ways to compete. One is voluntarily through free enterprise, which is good. And another way is, by picking up a gun and shooting each other, which is a very bad way to compete. Now, look, you and I might be in a boxing match, and all of a sudden you punch me in the nose, and I can't say, well, Lipton, you're invading me, you're using force, you're what's the word? You're guilty of assault and battery. No, because we've agreed to be in the boxing match, and we can hit each other above the belt. So you don't want to say that all violence is bad. Voluntary violence is okay, like in a boxing match. Hitting above the belt is acceptable. But other kinds of violence, where the government compels you against your will not to be able to own a truck because it's a means of production, well, that's very bad.
And we must dispel romantic notions. Based on empirical data, utopian socialism is a failure. Socialistic communities are not successful. So if you're a rational person, you don't want to be a socialist. You want to be a capitalist to compete in the free market.
Well, I agree with you when you're talking about coercive socialism, but voluntary social, well, yeah, even, you're making a good point with voluntary socialism, because take the Israeli case of the kibbutz again. When Israel started in 1948, they had a lot of kibbutzim, and the government heavily subsidized them. And when the government stopped subsidizing them, all of a sudden they're almost a vestige. And you had all these New Harmony and all of these hippie communes, none of which really lasted. So maybe the family, the mother, father, and a child or two or three, that kind of socialism has lasted throughout all of history. But when you get larger groups than that, it really doesn't work. And New Harmony and all of these other communes, they didn't really last. So you're making an excellent point again.
Because remember, Walter, the family is a kin group, and we bind kin groups together based on ethnicity and blood. But in
Yeah.
a real economy, especially in Western society, we're able to transcend kin groups. So at some point, jealousy will kick in. If your mother is the head of the family or your father is the head of the family, you will respect his authority because of sentiment and love. But in the real world, when John gets the job and you're equally qualified or even smarter, you may become really upset.
Well, that's true. Certainly, there is unfairness in that sense. But another aspect of libertarianism. I mean, there are really three foundations. One is the non-aggression principle. The other is private property rights, and the third one would be free association. So suppose that John gets the job, even though you're better qualified because of nepotism. Namely, it's his father's factory or his father's firm. Well, does his father have a right to hire the son, even though you might be a better employee? Well, from a libertarian point of view, yes, he does have a right to do that. It's his farm or firm or factory or business. And if he wants to discriminate in favor of his children, well, even though it's unfair in some sense, it's fair in a much broader sense because he has a right to do with his private property whatever he wants.
Well, Walter, it's dependent on the contract. If the contract stipulates that people ought to be hired on the basis of their qualifications, then the father is in the wrong.
That's true. If there's a contract and if the firm has a contract that you pick the best person for the job, well, then the father is guilty of contract violation. But if there's no contract preventing him from doing that, then I think he has the right to do that.
Yes, we have been talking a lot about socialism and human rights. Quite a compelling conversation. But we we decided that we're going to continue with the first discussion. So part two of privatization. Why should we privatize the roads?
Yes. Well, I have another book on that. I've written three books in my privatization series, one on oceans, rivers, lakes, one on moon and Mars and space, and the third one on, well, actually, that's the first one I wrote on roads. Well, I had two motivations for writing this book, why we should privatize roads, streets, highways, avenues, thoroughfares, sidewalks, whatever. And the main motivation is, do you know how many people die on the nation's highways every year? It's something a little lower than 40,000 or roughly 40,000. Sometimes it's 36,000, sometimes 38,000, sometimes 41,000. It's around 40,000 people a year die. And nobody says squat about this. I mean, how many people died in 9/11? Only 3,000. How many people died in Katrina, in the aftermath of Katrina, when the Army Corps of Engineers levees fell? 1,900. This is 40,000 people dying every year. Mothers, fathers, children. We talk about white cops killing black people. Well, how many black people are killed by white cops every year? I don't know, 10, 12, something like that.
Minute, we don't, we'll have this conversation later, or maybe we may not, but that's a myth.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that 40,000 people die on the roads, and 40,000 is a big number, and you'd think that there'd be something in the newspapers bewailing this, there's really nothing, and the question is, well, why is it that so many people are dying? Well, one reason, if you look at the literature, what they'll say is speeding, or drunken driving, or vehicle malfunction, or texting while driving, or things like that, falling asleep at the wheel. Well, in my book, what I say is that these things are just proximate causes. It's sort of like, suppose I take a gun now and I shoot out the window and I kill somebody. And the cops come to me and they're grabbing me and wanting to accuse me of murder. I say, yeah, it wasn't me. It was the bullet that killed the person. They laugh at me because, yes, the bullet was the proximate cause, but the ultimate cause was me shooting the bullet. So what's the ultimate cause? Why is it that what's the cause of the fact that we have so much speeding deaths and vehicle malfunction deaths and driver inattention deaths and drunken driving deaths? And my answer is it's the manager. Another analogy I use is suppose you and I, Lipton, are called in to analyze why a restaurant failed. And we start listing, well, the food was lousy and the restaurant was located in a cul-de-sac and the place was dirty and they didn't have good advertising and they charged too high price. And that was our analysis as to why the restaurant failed. Well, these are only proximate causes. The ultimate cause is the manager, the owner and the manager didn't hire a better waitress, didn't hire a better chef, didn't hire someone with a broom to clean the place. So the speeding and driver inattention and texting and all that, those are just proximate causes. The ultimate cause of the deaths on the highway, just like the ultimate cause of the restaurant failing, is the management. And who's the manager of all the roads? Government. Government manages the roads. So what I'm saying is, what we should do is privatize the highways.
But Walter, I do agree, but I think that as libertarians, we need to demonstrate how privatization can result in competition and how competition fuels innovation. So, for example, if the highways are private, then we're going to compete aggressively. Therefore, if you drive on my highway, you may be provided with a fringe benefit. Maybe you will get coffee or a donut.
That's right. And if you drive on my highway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, if you go on Lipton's highway, it's a death Toronto house and you're going to die on Lipton's highway. Come to the Walter highway and you'll be safer. And what I do in this book is I give all sorts of examples as to what a road owner might do to reduce traffic fatalities. Because Lipton, what city do you live in?
I live in St. Andrew, so presently I'm now in Kingston. But okay, so let me just get to the point. So St. Andrew is one parish, Kingston is another parish in Jamaica, but people often confuse Kingston and St. Andrew. But I live in St. Andrew, and the capital of St. Andrew is Halfway Tree. So Halfway Tree is a big city in St. Andrew in Jamaica.
I for some reason I thought you lived in the U.S. Let me give a U.S. I live in New Orleans, and in New Orleans, there's the highway I-10 that goes all the way from Florida, California, and it goes right through New Orleans. And on that highway and on every other highway, it's a 3-lane highway in many places, although in some places it's a 2-lane highway, but in many places a 3-lane highway. And what are the rules of the road? The rules of the road is you have to do at least 40 miles an hour and you can't do more than 70. Well, is that the best way to run a 3-lane highway? Maybe it would be better. Maybe it would be better if on the right lane, everyone had to do 55. And in the middle lane, everyone had to do 65. And in the left lane, everyone had to do 75. Do we think that this would be better, would reduce deaths? Because, right now, if you are doing 70 in the left lane, what happens is a lot of people start passing you and switching lanes and going around you because it's perfectly legal to do 70 in the left lane. But a lot of people go 75 and 78 and they're going to, look upon you as a pain in the neck. Well, the answer to the question is, would it be better to have, say, 50, 65 and 80 in the 3 lanes? Or would it be better to have 50, 70, and 90 in the 3 lanes? We don't know. We have no way of telling because every road, every major highway in the United States has a minimum of 40 and a maximum of 70, and we don't know. Now, Lipton, on your highway, if you said it should be 55, 65, and 75, and on my highway, I said it should be 60, 70, and 80, then after a year or so, we might be able to say, well, which one worked better? I mean, this is the way every other industry works, through competition. You're usually mentioning competition quite rightly, and all I'm saying is we should apply this idea of competition to the highways. So if on the Lipton Highway there was a certain rule of the road, and on the Walter Highway there was a different rule of the road, and on Jones's Highway and Smith's Highway there were other rules of the road, and then what you would have is statisticians and other people would monitor the deaths, and they would say, well, the best way to do it is the Lipton way. Well, then everyone would adopt the Lipton pattern, and we would save lives. So that would be just one example of how this could be. Another example is, on a two-lane highway, sometimes you get trucks, one truck trying to pass the other truck, and it'll take them 15 miles for the other truck to pass the first truck. And meanwhile, all the cars are, and the trucks can only do like 60 miles an hour, and it's a 70-mile highway. So a lot of times, I tell you, this is a true confession. When I see one truck following the other truck, what I do is I hit the gas to get ahead of the trucks because I'm afraid that I'll get stuck behind one truck trying to pass another truck. So I'll tell you this: on my highway, what I would do is I would say, um, uh, to the truck that's being passed, slow down for 2 minutes and let the other guy pass you. And if you don't, I'm going to give you a big ticket. Now, would this work? Again, we don't know. And I'm no real highway expert. I'm not
Expert.
a,
Neither am I.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Neither am I.
Ah, right. Neither of us are, but there's the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, and remember I gave you the examples of speeding and drunk driving and this and that and the other. They've come up with 125 different causes of highway fatalities. Like how close is the hospital, and are there ambulances that are in helicopters? I mean, very, very meticulous work, but they don't make a distinction between ultimate and proximate causes. So these people, they're the experts. They're like central planners. And, Mises had a lot of negative things to say about central planners. Well, on the highways, we've got central planners. And I think that, on my highway, what I'm going to say is that if the truck who is being passed doesn't slow down, I'm going to give them a big ticket. And I think that that'll save lives, because people waiting for the truck to pass the other truck are filled with road rage, and they'll go up to 100 miles an hour to pass the trucks before they can get side by side. So I think, I don't know, but I think that this will save lives.
And
And
you are correct. And the privatization will also reduce crime. Just
uh,
look just look at
yeah.
the example of the BLM riots.
That's a very, very good point. On my private road, I'm not going to allow anyone, BLM or non-BLM or anyone, to get in the middle of the highway and stop traffic. That would be a very bad thing. I mentioned that there are two motivations that started me on that. One was to save lives. The other one was congestion, traffic congestion. I don't know what it's like in Jamaica where you are, Lipton, but in the U.S., I used to live in New York City near the Long Island Expressway, and the word for the Long Island Expressway is the longest parking lot in the country, because it's about 110 miles, and people are bumper to bumper for 110 miles. Well, why do we have traffic congestion? Well, the superficial answer given by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration would be, well, because rush hour in the morning, everyone wants to go to work, and in the afternoon, everyone wants to go back from work. No, 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 that's not why. The reason we have that is we don't have peak load pricing. So what's peak load pricing? Peak load pricing is you charge more during the peaks than otherwise. Like in uh, Denver, in Colorado, they have skiing, and the ski season is in the winter. And guess what? They charge more for hotels and more for pretty much everything during the winter than in the summer. And similarly, in New Orleans, nobody really wants to come to New Orleans in the summer, so we charge more during the winter. And I used to work at Holy Cross in Massachusetts, and the season there was around September, October, where the leaves turn beautiful colors, red and orange and yellow, and they charge more during the peak. Similarly, restaurants charge more for dinner than for lunch, because more people want to go out to dinner than for lunch. And movies charge very little on a Tuesday night, because nobody wants to come to movie on a Tuesday night, whereas they charge more on a Friday and a Saturday night. So we have peak load pricing all throughout the economy, but we don't have it on the roads. So what we should do, and what private enterprise would do, is during the peaks, so 8 in the morning till 9 in the morning, and 4:30 to 6 in the afternoon, or whatever the peaks are, uh, private enterprise would charge more, and that would iron out the oscillations of use, and this would save road rage, because people get very angry when they're bumper to bumper. So that would be my second minor motivation. My major motivation for the book would be saving lives. So about half of the book is filled with all sorts of suggestions. Another suggestion is, on my road, whenever there's a death, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a big cross, and I'm not talking about a cross that's or a Jewish star or the Islamic equivalent. I'm not talking about 2 feet high. I'm talking about 50 feet high. I'm going to put a cross every time a person dies on my road, and maybe that'll scare people. Will this work? I don't know. Again, I'm not a road engineer, but I think it might. So one half of the book is all sorts of weird, exotic, right off the top of my head
The,
suggestions.
the, the positive externalities are numerous, Walter.
I'm sorry.
The positive externalities are numerous.
Yes, yes, there would be great benefits if we had road privatization. So as I was saying, half the book is suggestions for what road owners might do to reduce deaths. And again, I'm not sure that anyone worked, but if some tried this and some tried that, we would find out.
So
And the
for
other half of the book is dealing with objections to road privatization.
so for example, entrepreneurs are driven by profit. As a result, they will take complaints seriously. Governments pretend to take complaints seriously, but my complaints and the complaints of others are often ignored. Government bureaucrats do not have an incentive to take our complaints seriously. Most of them are poorly paid. So why would they take the complaint of a random consumer seriously? But when you're in business, you need to make your consumers happy, even if your consumer is not as rich as Bill Gates.
You're making an excellent, exquisitely important point, that we as consumers have much more control over producers of consumer goods than we as voters have control over politicians and bureaucrats. I mean, we engage in the dollar vote every day, and sometimes 15 times a day. And if we like spinach, we buy spinach. If we don't like spinach, we don't buy spinach. And then the spinach people have to dance to our tune. On the other hand, bureaucrats, they're civil servants, and unless they're caught with their hand in the till, that they can't be fired at all. And politicians, we can't get rid of them for 2 or 4 years. Well, sometimes you can have a thing like they're now having for the a recall vote, but it's very expensive and very inefficient to have a recall vote. So we as consumers have much more control over producers of goods and services than we as voters have control. So you're quite right. When you go to the government to complain, well, and I haven't even started on the Motor Vehicle Bureau. I mean, you go to the Motor Vehicle Bureau, you can sit there for a month or so before you get served. And if you complain, they say, yeah, go somewhere else. Whereas if it was private and you complain, if you go to a coffee shop and you complain about something, the manager and the owner are going to take it seriously, because if you're an unsatisfied customer, there'll be other unsatisfied customers, and you get too many unsatisfied customers and you go broke. Whereas the Motor Vehicle Bureau can't go broke, so they don't have to worry as much.
And the benefits of privatization are more evident in poor countries. In poor countries, bureaucrats make less. Poor countries are more inefficient, trust tends to be lower, and poor countries are also more likely to be corrupt. So a bureaucrat in a poor country is susceptible to bribes, whereas a bureaucrat in a rich country may succumb to bribes, but because of culture, transparency, and salaries, that bureaucrat may be less inclined to collect bribes.
Yes,
So
and not
poor
only
countries should lobby for privatization, but many of them do not.
Yes, and the reason that they're poor is they have less privatization. If they had more privatization, they wouldn't be so poor. And it's not only bribes, it's also extortion. My understanding is that in many poor countries, if a cop stops you for something, he wants a bribe. And if you don't give him a bribe, he'll arrest you. So you have to start paying off people due to extortion. So the poor countries are in much more dire straits than the rich countries.
A
For,
perfect a perfect example is Jamaica. So for example, some years ago, rockstar economists did a study saying that regulations will increase distrust and they often result in more regulations. Jamaica is corrupt. Trust is also low in Jamaica. Basically, Jamaica is still a society that's governed by political kings and social kings. We're not tribal in the familial sense, but it's a tribal society. Jamaicans tend to lobby for regulations, and the regulations keep failing because the problem is not the absence of regulation, it's a culture that's not underpinned by trust and social capital.
yes, well, your knowledge of Jamaica is vastly exceeding mine. I'm not really familiar with the situation there, but you're quite right. In general, the underdeveloped countries or the poor countries are in dire straits in many, many ways: health, education, wealth, welfare, and everything. And it wouldn't shock me to find that the trust levels are lower as well. And paradoxically, these are the countries that are in most in need of free enterprise, and yet they're the least open to it. I mean, many countries in Central and South America and the Caribbean, where you are relatively poor, and the people there are convinced by the siren song of socialism to keep the same situation going.
Yeah, it's just silly, and even those you assume to be a bit educated often succumb to the Kool-Aid of socialism. It doesn't get better in the developing world
Yeah.
unless the country is headed by a benevolent dictator like Lee Kuan Yew. This is what studies have confirmed. Benevolent dictators that are committed to economic freedom and liberty tend to produce pro-market countries in the developing world.
Yes, Singapore is a perfect example of that. And also Pinochet. I mean, we were
Yeah,
talking about
Pinochet.
Milton Friedman. He went down to Chile and he gave lectures. And what was the essence of his lectures? Privatize and have more free enterprise. And the leftist intellectuals hated him for that. I mean, he went to Red China also and gave the same message. Yeah, I don't mean this as a criticism of Milton Friedman, but he was a one song person or a one song singer, and his song was free enterprise. And wherever he went, he would try to promote free enterprise. And yet, they don't, the leftist intellectuals don't mind that he goes to China, but they were very, very angry at him and trying to boycott him for going to Chile. And you made another excellent point that I think deserves more development, and that is that it's the intellectuals that are really bad. It's the people in the United States. Flyover country has less education than the coasts, and New York and Massachusetts and California and the west coast of California, Oregon, Washington are all very, very lefty. And then what happens is people leave California, go to Texas. People leave New York and go to Florida. Why? Because the regulations and the crime and the taxation. And then they vote like they did in New York and Massachusetts and California and try to make Texas more like and Florida more like the places where they came from. So you get a lot of weird paradoxes. But I think the point that you made was really excellent. Is that the intelligentsia, who are the Bernie Sanders fans? It's highly educated people.
And rich people, the children of wealthy people.
Yes, unfortunately, Wall Street now is becoming woke, and they're supporting all sorts of horrible sorts of things. Lipton, I promised to give you an hour, and it's coming close to the end of
Yes,
the
yes.
hour.
So we're
So,
going to wrap up soon, Walter. But before wrapping up, I cannot allow you to go without talking about defamation. You don't support defamation laws.
right, libel and slander and defamation laws are improper. Now, that doesn't mean that I favor libel and slander and defamation. The libertarian analysis of this is as follows. A lot of people say, "Well, I'm now going to libel you, Lipton. I'm going to say you're a bum, you're stupid, and you're an idiot, and you're lazy, and whatever." And now people are going to say, well, you just libeled Lipton, and now nobody's going to be his friend. His wife is going to leave him if he's married. I don't know if you're married. You're going to lose your job, and your reputation is going to be smashed. And they would say, well, if I stole your coat, Lipton, you'd be better off because your coat isn't as important as your reputation. And I libeled you, and I hurt you a lot more than if I had stolen your coat. And if I had stolen your coat, I'd go to jail for it. So or I'd be penalized heavily for it. So if I ruined your reputation, I should be penalized even more heavily. Well, the libertarian answer to that is
You
you own
don't
your.
own people's reputation.
That's it. You put your finger right on it. You paradoxically, even though you work hard for your reputation, and by the way, you have a great reputation, Lipton.
Who, me?
I'm a big fan of yours.
Okay.
So you work hard for your reputation, and you can cash in on your reputation. But paradoxically, you don't own your reputation, because what your reputation consists of is the thoughts not Lipton's thought about Lipton, but rather everyone else's thoughts about you. And you don't own everyone else's thoughts. So paradoxically, even though you work hard for your reputation and you benefit from having a good reputation, you don't own it. And therefore, when I steal it by libeling you, I didn't steal anything you own. So therefore, you have no a case in law against me. And then the other paradox would be that reputations would be safer without libel laws, because right now, if I say something bad about Lipton, people are going to say, well, with the smoke, there's fire. Maybe isn't as big a bum as Walter said he was, but he's a little bit of a bum. Whereas without libel laws, everyone would be libeling everyone else, and no longer would a mere allegation suffice to ruin anyone's reputation. People would then say, well, what's your proof that Lipton is a bum? And I said, well, I don't have any. But you have two paradoxes. One, you don't really own your reputation, and therefore, from a deontological point of view, libel and defamation and slander laws are illegitimate. And second paradox is that reputations be safer, not more endangered, without libel laws.
All right. But before you go, quick rejoinder, because there's a point I must make. Point number one, defamation laws breach the encroachment principle. Obviously, we don't control the ideas that are embedded in the mind of others. However, we work very hard to acquire our reputation and prestige. So, for example, franchising is an example of a reputational brand, or what some would term a reputational right. When Walter slanders my reputation, other individuals are unlikely to buy my product. So, in a sense, defamation is breaching what I call the encroachment principle.
Well, yes, I am encroaching on you, but I'm not stealing anything from you. And from the libertarian point of view, the law should only stop theft. It shouldn't stop. Look, I could now write a bad movie review. You just made a movie, or you're a singer, and I write a critical review of your singing. Or you just published a book, and I say the book was worthless. Well, I've ruined your reputation, but I have free speech. I should be able to say that your book or your article or your speech or your movie is no good. And
Yep.
yet I'm encroaching on you. So mere encroachment is not a crime.
All right, but Walter, I won't respond because I need to let you go. So I'm going to make another quick point. There is no right to privacy. And secondly, in the arena of revenge porn is a problem because contract laws are influenced by customs and norms. So, for example, if a young girl shares a nude photo of herself with her boyfriend, there is an assumption that he should maintain her trust. Therefore, if John Brown gets a photo, she has a case in law because there is an implicit contract. But if the same young lady is known to share photos with millions or hundreds of people, and her boyfriend decides to share her photo with someone else, she shouldn't have a case in law. What he did was improper, but I don't think that is a legal issue.
Well, Lipton, I really enjoyed our two
Yes.
sessions, and I'm looking forward to a third when we can do more justice to these very important questions
Yes.
now
But
raised.
bye, and I enjoyed our conversation. Bye, Walter.
Take care, Lipton. Bye.